Hello, this is My Last Duchess. Let's take you through the plot of the poem. We must remember that we are looking at this from the perspective of power and conflict, and this is very much a poem about power. What's going on? The Duke, who is our speaker, a powerful man, is giving a guided tour to an emissary, a representative of the family of his next wife, his wife-to-be. He's giving a tour of the artwork he has collected. As such, the Duke is a powerful figure speaking to a less powerful figure. Ultimately, his job is to impress this man so that the marriage that he seeks can go ahead, but impress him in such a way so that it's made very apparent that he, the Duke, our speaker, is the most powerful person in the room, in the poem. Some contextual points to be aware of. The poem was first published in 1842. It's written by Robert Browning, but he sets his poem in the 16th century, in the time of the Italian Renaissance. I've written there what Renaissance means: rebirth, a time of a transition towards modernity after the supposed dark ages of the 13th and 14th centuries. This rebirth saw artworks, writings, sculptures, plays, artistic pursuits being revalued at this particular time. Browning sets his poem in this period because in this period, women became the property of their husband upon marriage. Women did not have the vote. Women were artworks, really, beautiful things to be almost seen but not heard, and maybe even neither seen nor heard if we follow this poem as a guide. There are things in Robert Browning's own personal life that students often write about. I don't think they're that helpful, to be honest. Robert Browning married Elizabeth Barrett Browning. It is said her father was not one to approve their marriage. Robert Browning treated his wife as an equal, as he probably should have done. His wife was in her own right very famous. She was a poet called Elizabeth Barrett Browning. A quick Google search and you'll find an awful lot of stuff on her. So she was powerful in her own right. And perhaps this explains to some degree why he writes the poem. But the key with this kind of contextual information is to focus, it has to be woven in with the writing itself. We're not history teachers when we're looking at poems. We want you to discuss the poem. So therefore, My Last Duchess is about the way that women are treated. Browning seeks to highlight the injustices, the inequalities of the way women are treated through his character of the Duke. He utilizes the form of dramatic monologue. It's a one-person speech. Mono underlined because mono means one. And so although in theory the Duke is speaking to another person, the other person doesn't respond. And therefore that's another way of reinforcing the power of the Duke. The Duke is constructed by Browning to use iambic pentameter and rhyming couplets. And these are, in part at any rate, contrasting features. The iambic pentameter, dee-dum, 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 which we've looked at before, is often utilized by poets and writers to create a sort of naturalistic conversational style. And that is the case in this particular poem. There is a conversational style that is designed to demonstrate the ease of the speaker, the Duke. However, the rhyming couplets demonstrate supreme control. And so although the style of the poem is conversational, it's chatty, it's easy, there's nothing unplanned about this whatsoever. This little video is a kind of demonstration of that. I have notes. I have notes, so I say the right things, but I try and deliver them in a reasonably conversational, chatty style, because well, that's what suits me, I suppose. Now let's have a read of the poem. I'm going to read it in that chatty, conversational style. And I'm going to just sort of track it so I don't lose my place, as it is a long poem. That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that a piece of wonder now. Brother, father, Pandulph's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will it please you sit and look at her? I said Fra Pandulph by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I've drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me if they durst, how such a glance came there. So, not the first of you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Fra Pandolph chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one. My favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bow of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one and say, just this or that in you disgusts me. Here you miss or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, and no doubt, whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands, as if alive. Will it please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Note his Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. Now, the conversational way in which I read it is deliberate to try and convey tone. It's chatty, it's easy. Doesn't necessarily make what he's saying any easier to follow, at least the first time around. So we must translate it a little bit. There is my last wife on the wall. Note the possessive pronoun there in the title. And as I translate, I'm going to annotate. And I'd encourage you to do the same. Possessive, my last Duchess. So there she is, painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. So she's not. She's obviously not alive. I call that piece a wonder now. What a magnificent piece of artwork it is now. Rather implying he didn't see it as a magnificent piece of artwork before. Fra, brother, friar, religious man, made-up figure, famous painter. He's name-dropping. Don't you know how powerful and important I am? I have the greatest artists who ever lived painting for me. I'm kind of a big deal, is the inference and the implication here. Fra Pandolph's hands worked busily, he worked hard, and there she stands. Will it please you sit and look at her? Do you want to sit and look at her? It sounds like a polite request. It's not a polite request, it's an instruction. Will it please you sit and look at her? High status duke, talking to a servant, really, an emissary. Sit down. But it's framed as question. So we have instruction. We have an imperative framed as an interrogative, an instruction framed as a question. I said Frau Pandolf on purpose, for never read strangers like you that pictured her face, her facial expression, her countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since nobody else but me can look at her, he's saying, just to reinforce that he's a powerful figure, and seemed as they would ask me if they dare, how such a glance came there. So effectively he's telling us that she's rather a beauty. It looks like she's giving the eye. And I can do it, I just about can, sorry about that. She's giving the eye, ooh, hubba hubba. She's giving the eye to people in her pictures. That's why he covers it up. People ask him, if they dare, how did such a glance come to be there? And you're not the first one to ask. So he's complaining about his wife because he's complaining about his former wife, a wife who is no longer around. How could that be? Because she sort of looked nicely at people. He seems rather an insecure chap. He doesn't explain how she came to have the look in a satisfactory way. Sir, it was not only my presence that caused the blushing spot of joy. A woman blushing? Oh my goodness! Now, contextually, there is some suggestion that to blush was a sign of sexual desire. Another sign of the Duke's insecurity, but the woman blushes and her sexual desire is manifest, and it's not for him and him alone. And that is an outrage in his eyes, in his mind. Perhaps the religious man, perhaps the Christian fella, chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. Maybe, he says, the religious man who has sworn a vow of celibacy, presumably, a man who's sworn to live chaste, to not have sex because he is sworn to God, perhaps she was sort of flattered by the attentions of the religious guy. And that to the Duke is an outrage. Such stuff was, just politeness, courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that blush. She was, how do I say, too nice. She was too nice. She was too soon made glad. She was too easily impressed. She liked everything. She liked everything she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Now, I'm not writing everything down. You need to. You need to ensure your annotations are splendid and detailed, so that you're translating it if you need to. But the key phrase I keep repeating here is the idea of the Duke's insecurity. Now he begins to list, and the list details the reasons he was displeased. She was too nice, he is effectively implying. It was all the same. My being near her, my favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, so sunset, a bow of cherry some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the horse she rode around on, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech or blush at least. The Duke wants there to be a hierarchy. of almost affections. He wants to be number one in her affections, far above everything else. But to his mind, eating some cherries, riding on a horse, seeing the sunset, those things were on the same level. They had the same status as him. And that's not on. She thanked men, she was a good wife, he's saying. Good, but thanked somehow, I don't really know how, as if she ranked, and here's the crutch, here's the crux, I should say, as if she ranked my name, my status, who I am, my 900 years old name with anybody's gift. I'm pulling faces on purpose, like, what an outrage he's implying. He wants her to be grateful. He seeks gratitude. He seeks affirmation. From his wife. It appears that his ego is so fragile that his wife, I don't know, eating some cherries and feeling kind of happy about it, makes him feel challenged. He now says, who would lower themselves? Who would stoop? Who would lower themselves to blame this sort of nonsense? Even if you had skill in speech, which I have not. I'm just going to put a little exclamation mark there. Even if you had skill in speech, which I don't. All right, mate. All right. You don't have any skill in speech, but we've got a what? 55-line poem, I think it is, in perfect iambic pentameter, with a series of rhyming couplets, and you don't have skill in speech. He's a charlatan. Well, he's a hypocrite. He's a liar. But he is of such high status that his lies are left unchallenged. So even if you had skill in speech, which I don't, to make your will quite clear to such a one and say, this about you annoys me, or here or there you're not doing too much, or you're doing too much. And even if she let herself be lessoned so, even if she would learn it, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, or if she provided an excuse, even then would be some stooping. And I choose never to stoop. I will not lower myself for anybody, he says. I am a man, and I will not lower myself to the rank of a woman. Ugh! He might as well vomit. It's not subtle, this particular section of the poem. It does reinforce the nature of the gender divide that Browning seeks to expose. I love that. It's always a good verb choice for English literature. Browning seeks to expose the gender divide, the inequalities, the immorality of that gender divide. I always think an interesting verb of Browning's there is choose, because the Duke has agency. The man can choose. The woman, the female, cannot choose. What is agency? Choice and power, the combination of choice and power. The Duke can choose, the woman could not. Also, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her. She was nice to me. But who didn't she smile at? And here we have arguably the sort of most sinister line in the poem. and it's notably different to most of the other lines in the poem. This grew. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. We have the short staccato, rat-a-tat-tat lines. All of the previous lines have been, laden with punctuation, but it's fluent. We have lots and lots of enjambment. So previously, we have enjambment. Some teachers will pronounce it enjambment, enjambment. I'll try and stick to one, enjambment. Enjambment being, the continuation from one line into the next. The effect of enjambment will be different in different poems. It's not always about pace. In this instance, it's about conversational style. But here we have the staccato use of caesura, that's the poetic technique, the caesura of the semicolon, which contrasts the enjambment that has made up much of the rest of the poem. This grew. I gave commands. What commands? Then all smiles stopped together. Is this a euphemism for her death? That's the sort of typical reading of this poem. There she stands. There's the drawing of her as if she's alive. Will it please you rise? I'm just writing there as before. It's an instruction framed as a question. It's an imperative. I'll write it the other way this time. Framed as an interrogative. To be honest, I prefer the word question. I just think it's more straightforward. Do you want to stand up? Stand up. This is what powerful people do, isn't it? They make you feel like you're being given a choice, but they're not giving you a choice at all. Think about your teachers. Maybe they're not, Duke levels of powerful, but they might do this thing whereby they ask you a question, but they're not really asking you a question. Jimmy, open the window. Thanks. Not Jimmy, open the window, please. Jimmy, open the window. Thanks. It's like you're doing it. You're going to do it. Thanks. I've assumed you're doing it. It's a little power play, really. Will it please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. We'll go and see everyone else now, he says. The Count, your master's known sort of wealth. Your boss's known wealth is ample warrant that no just pretense, his wealth and generosity, I should add. His kind of kindness with money is ample warrant that there's no just pretense of mine for dowry will be disallowed. What's dowry? Money. Money, money, money. Dowry is the money that would be paid from father of the bride to son-in-law to maintain and upkeep the life, upkeep the woman. Not a commonplace thing of the middle and late and obviously the 21st century, but not a common feature of the 20th century, really, from say post-World War II, I suppose. That is a generalization, but more commonplace, say, in the 19th century when Browning would have been writing, and certainly in the Italian Renaissance when the text is set. So why does this Duke want a new Duchess? Money. He wants the money from the father-in-law to sustain him. And that's why there's the Last Duchess. And maybe there was a Duchess before that and a Duchess before that. But his power is such that it doesn't matter what happens to the previous wife, because he is a duke. And as a duke, people want to marry that guy because with the word duke comes duchess. And if you were of a slightly lower status, but maybe you have some money, you might pay to have your daughter marry into such an influential family, to gather such an influential title. For the Duke's part, all about money. Though his fair daughter's self, as I vowed, as I promised at starting, is my object. She's mine. He is staking his claim. Nay, we'll go down together, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, sort of rarity, which Klaus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. Notice, he says, how this other famous person, he's made them, Browning's made Klaus of Innsbruck up, but notice how this other famous artist or sculptor has made this thing for me. And what is the thing? It's Neptune. It's a god taming, a male god taming something else. Just in case we weren't clear of the symbolism of man's dominance over woman, Browning makes it explicitly clear at the end of the poem. To my mind, this poem is always most interesting when students discuss a few key things. They are the one-sided nature of it, the conversational quality of the writing in comparison to the very strict sort of structure, the name dropping, the questions framed as, the instructions framed as questions, the fragility in this sort of early part of the poem, the fragility of the Duke's ego, which is barely hidden, to be honest, and how it builds to this line here. This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. Why does he want this new wife? Cash, money, power. That's it for this particular poem in terms of annotation. Make sure that you write these things down. But broadly speaking, what's this poem about? The power of gender. The power that high status people wield over others. That's a C. The facade, the veneer, the pretense of civility. Browning appears to be saying that in Victorian society, in Renaissance, Italian Renaissance society, the way that women are treated is abominable. The pretense, the veneer, the facade, the front that is marriage for most people is abominable. It's an abomination. And in writing his one-sided poem, deliberately one-sided poem, he exposes such flaws. That's it for now. Hope it makes sense. Questions to follow. Thanks very much. Bye. I can stop the video.